The year was 1996, and I was your typical teenager. You know, parents are lame, my friends are cool. In fact, the only time I really listened to my parents is when I called my dad at work one day to tell him that I was going to join the military. And after all his begging, when he realized that I wasn't going to change my mind, he told me, whatever you do, just please do not join the Marines. And it's not that my dad didn't have respect for the Marines. In fact, it was the complete opposite. My dad was a Marine veteran. He was a 3rd Force Reconnaissance Marine who had fought during Vietnam, and I guess he just couldn't picture his daughter doing the same thing. So, when I walked into the military recruiting office in my suburban Philly town, I went past the Marine office and just haphazardly into the next one, which happened to be the Air Force office, and I said, sign me up. This kind of spontaneous, not really well thought out idea was my signature style during my teenage years. And so my friends' parents would call it rebellious, and my friends just called me crazy. And what they meant by crazy is that I was usually the one with all the harebrained ideas. The one that had us running from some pissed off parents who usually weren't our own, the cops, and sometimes we were even lucky to get away from the situation alive. So knowing that I was leaving for boot camp in a few months, I know, and thinking about like this might be the last time I ever get to do anything crazy, I knew that I wanted to do something big. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that it would have to top the list. Now when I had this epiphany, I was watching the Jerry Springer show with my best friend Jen. And Jen and I were big fans of Jerry Springer, and we would often stay up late and watch the show together. So when I said to Jen, dude, let's get tickets to see Jerry Springer, it'll be awesome. She definitely wasn't surprised that I said that, but she hesitated because she knew the idea was crazy, but you know, she had to think about whether she was going to be on board, and she knew we'd have to drive from Philly to Chicago. So we asked our other friends, and nobody else wanted to go except for Kelly, and then the rest of our friends just joked that we would never make it. And they weren't talking about the transportation because I had a 1987 Crown Victoria. It was a box of a car, but it was reliable, and it was plenty of room for the 3 of us and all of our stuff. So we were on board. Now what our friends really meant is that they didn't think that we would be able to find our way out of Philadelphia. So to prove them wrong, number 1, we did not bring any weed on this trip. Because we knew that if we brought weed, we would smoke it all, and we would probably be too fucked up to find our way out of Philly. Number 2, we decided to videotape the entire trip, even making the toll booth people say hello and the name of the state that we were entering. So when we made it to Pittsburgh without any problems, we were laughing in the face of our friends. Through the video camera, of course, which we would then show them later. But we just thought it was hilarious. We had such a great time on our way there. Kelly was mooning truckers. Jen had made a mixtape that we were about on our 3rd round of that. And we were smoking cigarettes just because we could. Nobody was there to stop us. So then it happened. We ran into our first major setback. It was just past the Steel City, and it wasn't the tanker accident that closed the road for several hours and had us sitting in traffic, nor the fact that we had to drive the shoulder to find the nearest bathroom because Kelly had to pee that bad. But it was the fact that we decided to find a hotel because it was late and it just seemed like a natural thing to do. So I drove for miles, we were trying to find a hotel, and we finally came across a motel that, and I kid you not, when we pulled into the empty parking lot, there was a light fog on the parking lot. Still, we thought, yeah, you know what? This will be a really good idea. Let's stay at this rundown Norman Bates-like motel. And to top it off, it had neon pink, yellow, and blue lights boasting free HBO and mirrored jacuzzi tubs, which of course I considered, and Kelly was like, no way, that's disgusting. Who knows what's floating around in those things? Now, none of us really remember what the check-in guy looked like, but we do remember that he was overly excited about 3 teenage girls checking into his motel. And he actually tried to get us to get a room with a jacuzzi mirror tub more than several times. Needless to say, we grabbed the key and we went right to our room. When we walked into our room, it smelled like the sheets had not been changed since the 70s. The decor definitely had never been updated. And there's these 2 thin wooden doors on each side of the room that we thought were closets. And when we opened them, here they were the connecting doors to the other motel rooms. So we decided to shove chairs under the doorknobs because we saw that in a scary movie one time. So, and then we decided not to get showers either because there was this nasty brown ring around the bathtub. and none of us could figure out what it was, and we weren't going to get close enough to find out, and we knew it wasn't a water stain. Needless to say, we did not sleep that night, and we left at daybreak. When we reached Chicago, it was a sight for sore eyes. The buildings were beautiful, and the familiar city sounds were a relief to us. Even the Motel 6 where we were staying was elegant, and the building towered over the city streets, and we could not wait to see the view from our room. So the only problem was is that the parking garage was not connected to the building. The doorman told us that it was across the street on the opposing 4-lane street. So we had to unload all of our stuff in front of the hotel, and then Kelly stayed back and took our stuff to the room while Jen and I went to go park the car. So we were waiting in the left-hand turn lane, and the light turned green, but there was no green arrow. And the cars on the opposing lane weren't moving though. And I said to Jen, what's going on? Do they do things differently here in Chicago? Are they just that nice? So she said, they're not moving, and so I went for it. So we made the left-hand turn, and nobody else was moving either. And when we got to the 4th lane, we saw the garage, and we saw a red cab come barreling down the 4th lane towards the passenger side. And we didn't have time to brace for impact. And I remember turning away because I was afraid to see whatever was going to happen to Jen. So luckily I had that Crown Victoria. That thing was sturdy, and it was a strong box type frame. So luckily Jen and I were able to get out. We got out of the car, walked around it, but the people of Chicago weren't too fond of that because without any blood or dead bodies on the street, basically all we were doing was holding up the lunch rush hour. So then they started yelling at us, get your car out of the road and move and all that kind of good stuff. So we got back into the car, pulled it into the garage and parked. And then we walked 10 city blocks to the nearest precinct to file a report. And of course the cabbie never showed. And the cops didn't seem surprised by that. They just shrugged their shoulders and said, oh well, we don't know what to tell you. We walked back to the hotel, and of course Kelly at that point was worried because we had been gone for quite a few hours. We told her what happened, and we decided to lay low that night, just order pizza to the room because the taping of the Jerry Springer show would be the next morning. The next morning it was a beautiful day. We walked a few blocks to the NBC building, and when we got there we turned our tickets in and we waited with a large group of people. And we were told by the tour guide who was taking us down towards the studio that when we got to the studio, Jerry Springer would be there to shake our hands before we walked into our seats. I couldn't wait. I had always pictured this. I've been watching him for years. So when I shook his hand, I thought, you know, this is the first famous person I have ever met. And he looked a lot like he did in person as he did on TV. And then all of a sudden, Jen Kelly and I were ushered into the studio, and we were seated separately. So we weren't even going to be able to enjoy this experience together. Now, I guess if we had had text messaging back then, we could have just been talking to each other and texting each other. But instead, we had to wave our arms from across the room and say, hey, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're here. Do you see that? Do you see that? All the familiar sights that we knew from the television show. The Jerry Springer show was forgettable. That's right. I said forgettable. Not only were we not able to sit together, but it was about some dad who was heartbroken because his daughter smoked too much weed. Lame. It was a real heart-to-heart, so there was no hair pulling, there was no chair throwing. In fact, the most exciting thing that happened was that at the end of the show, the security guard asked us to stay for another taping of a different show, which also must have been a dud because none of us can remember what it was about. So, you know, all that way we thought for our one experience, our last hurrah. And we were glad to have that 15 minutes of fame because number one, we could prove our friends wrong. You know, and also it was a good thing that Jen's parents taped it because we couldn't bring our own video camera in. And somehow my car made it all the way back to Philly, even though it overheated, and the last 4 hours of the trip there was smoke coming out from under the hood. Yeah, it was real good. And my dad said he couldn't believe actually that we made it home without the engine blowing up because the belt had stopped working at some point. And it turned out it was okay because they really don't let you drive in basic training anyways. Now, this was my last harebrained idea though, I thought, before I was leaving for basic training. And it was a success in some ways, but in other ways, not so much. But more than anything, it topped the list.